Hello there, and thanks for joining me right here on this edition of The Brief. I'm Jessy Chahal. Today I'll be talking about the budget 2022 and how it affects SMEs and, of course, the growing gig economy. I'll be joined by Datuk Dr. A.T. Kumararajah, Secretary General of the Association, the Malaysian Association of Chambers. I'll get that full wording shortly, and also the Associate Professor Dr. AHMED RAZMAN Abdul Latiff, Economist from the Putra Business School. But first, here's some updates on what's happening in and around the country. We turn to the Prime Minister's visit to Indonesia. The Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob, held a joint press conference with the Indonesian President Joko Widodo just yesterday. And here are some of the key highlights from that. Malaysia and Indonesia have agreed to implement a travel corridor between the two countries as both countries recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Ismail Sabri has also assured that the welfare and protection of Indonesians working in Malaysia will continue to be preserved. Cooperation between Malaysia and Indonesia in culture will also be enhanced by the joint listing of several other collectively inherited cultural heritage items from UNESCO, for example. Now, in relation to the delimitation of the maritime border between both countries, Ismail Sabri gave his assurance that Malaysia remains committed to reaching a solution. Ismail Sabri and Jokowi witnessed the signing of two MOUs between Malaysia and Indonesia for cooperation in the field of education and customs. Of course, a lot of great new, perhaps salient progress coming out of this meeting as well. We move on to the Agenda Nasional Malaysia Sehat campaign, which was launched earlier this morning. This is the government's prep to help Malaysians cope with COVID-19. According to the Prime Minister, ANMS is aimed at cultivating a healthy lifestyle and promoting environmental sustainability to support the health and well-being of Keluarga Malaysia. It also aims as a health and wellness package that will reach out to the citizens. Of course, this is being researched and planned by the Health Ministry. It also involves other ministries, for example, the Housing and Local Government. Now, this agenda will last for 10 years and will be divided into two terms. As we see a lot of speed taking up as we try to bounce back better. And these are some of the words from our finance minister as well, when he reiterated just yesterday that the government will continue to build economic resilience to drive changes post the pandemic. And of course, to help us understand a little bit more of MOF's initiatives in this budget 2022. For now, we know that it is mainly the agenda, our top priority perhaps at this point of time is the recovery of businesses with, of course, a host of incentives and assistance that's offered to businesses, including SMEs, and of course, looking at the ever-growing gig economy as well. Now, to join me in this conversation, I would like to bring in Datuk Dr. A.T. Kumararajah, Secretary General at the Malaysian Associated Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, as well as Associate Professor Dr. AHMED RAZMAN Abdul Latiff, Economist from the Putra Business School. Gentlemen, welcome. It's good to speak to you once again, of course, on a very important topic this time as well, the budget 2022. Just been tabled, but now we are unpacking some of the juicier bits in here. And we know as we drive towards recovery, we have to, of course, acknowledge the fact that we need to remain resilient. And how can companies and businesses and organizations thrive by doing this? Perhaps, Dr. ATK, I could put the question first to you. How do you think SMEs can best move forward with the help that's been described in the budget 2022?
Thanks, Jessy. I think the SMEs need to take stock of where they are in terms of both their evolution as a business, in terms of where they are in terms of cash flow, and what has that really happened in the last 20 months of the pandemic. Because as they move from the pandemic, where they would have probably had near permanent changes, structural changes, business model changes, and also their cash flow, depends on that would determine where they talk about access to what's there really in the budget, because the budget does provide for access to financing. It speaks about microcredit financing. It speaks about access to markets. It speaks about going export. It speaks about industries that are probably going to be pivotal in the next 5 years. So depending on where they are, then they will know where to go to. Based on that, the budget does offer many things. So if you talk about access to financing, 40 billion ringgit under total large Semarak Niaga program. 14.2 billion of that, which is 36%, is earmarked for SMEs alone, and 1.8 billion out of that is ring fence for microcredit financing itself. So, and it's also scaling up, right? So you can go to Tekun and Agro Bank and BSN, all of which are offering some portion of this $1.8 billion as an interest-free fund. So there's interest-free fund, but that is a cap on 10,000 ringgit. And then you go up the scale. So microcredit agency is not more than 100,000. Then you go to the commercial banking sectors, DFIs, and I think SME Bank has got pretty good programs in the Young Entrepreneurs Fund. And then you go to the SME recapitalization. And then even if you go further up and up, you look at the MIDF programs, you look at the SJPP program, and also much higher. Even if you're looking at startup financing, the digital world, Cradle has got a My Startup Fund. So all this is available provided the SMEs know where they are. With that, they can actually pivot on to where they need to go.
That's right, pretty comprehensive in that aspect. Prof, if I could turn to you, how do you think SMEs can move forward now with the offerings of Budget 2022?
Yes, I do agree with Dr. ATK that the initiative outlined under this budget 2022 catered mainly towards the various status or stages of these SMEs. For those who are still looking for additional financing, of course, billions, about 14.2 billion of fund will be made available to them through various financial institutions. And there's also a targeted relief and recovery facility for those who are still looking to recover from what happened for the past more than a year. And of course, some of these companies, they do have new businesses, new opportunity, or new tender or contract to bid, and they need some additional guarantees, and this also have been provided to them. And what I particularly like about this budget 2022 is also to offer alternative financing, because we have seen when you are heavily leveraged, when you only have source of financing in terms of debt financing, borrowing from banks, when pandemic happened, when economic crisis happened, you got stuck because you have to pay on monthly basis even though you do not have revenue. And because of this, one particular aspect or alternative financing that has been highlighted in details in budget 22 is on towards equity crowdfunding, and of course there's also peer-to-peer lending platform, but I'm also more interested with equity and quasi-equity investment scheme, where even when those companies that need rehabilitation and support, there's also some equity scheme to help them to boost up their capital rather than their debt or liabilities. So this is something I think will make the SMEs become more resilient, because when we're talking about equity, when something happens to the business, when they are unable to generate the income or revenue as before, they are not obligated to pay that monthly payment to the bank. So this is something good coming from budget 2022.
That's right. Without the financial support through the different various packages that's been offered in the budget, it's almost like a start-stop situation, isn't it, for many businesses, whether you're a micro SME or an SME as well. But as you've mentioned, Prof, new businesses, new growth area, new financing as well. Doctor, you also mentioned this fact that question now will be, how can SMEs, or how will they reach out to really grab and have access to some of this financial assistance? Doctor, during the tabling of the budget, Finance Minister said a key area of focus is to enhance businesses, their access to financing, especially, as I've just mentioned, micro enterprises, and then the informal sector, perhaps even gig economy organizations. Can you help to explain how businesses can access, but more than that, capitalize on this financing?
Yes. Sorry.
So Dr. ATK.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Jessy. Just a quick one, right? So again, right? So depending on what are we talking about? So very first time, I think we've also changed terminologies. If you see how government has looked at it only in the pandemic period, one good thing that has happened is micro businesses have actually become now MSMEs, or as you in the Malay abbreviation PMKS. In that sense, last time it was only just SMEs. So micros are part and parcel of it. That alone plus this financing. So one good place, to me, I think a very good advice is to actually look at the portal that MOF has actually developed. The portal does speak about access to financing, and based on what that scaling I mentioned earlier, so if you're a startup or if you're already in business for a couple of years, or if you're looking at refinancing, or if you're looking at working capital financing, or you're looking at collateral financing, and even some aspect of alternative financing models have actually been offered in the current budget. And if you look at the gig economy story, which is what one of the topics for today, is primarily based on the fact that, look, access to financing has to change. So the model of engagement with the businesses also has to change. And I think as we move forward, I think our commitments towards sustaining development goal and the carbon footprint and the carbon exchange that has been proposed, actually, one of the story, if we go back some years ago, we had the green technology financing scheme. We never had many takers for it, simply because the banking system, the conventional banking system, did not have enough expertise to evaluate ROIs on green tech business or business that is very much climate centric or triple bottom line. So those things are now already imbibed, and part and parcel of this pandemic has been that transformation or the acceleration of learning. And that learnings now will help not only from the lender side, but also from the supply side in terms of the SMEs to actually access to many of these modalities of financing that the budget 2022 and also the 12th Malaysia plan has promised for the next 5 years.
Right. Prof, directing this question to you, there are many calls from various sides that the government must look at a new paradigm in reaching out to businesses, perhaps even new businesses under this, SMEs, micro business communities themselves. We also know in the past year and a half, almost 2 years, businesses have truly evolved. What should the government do to now reach out, and how can businesses work together with them to move forward? Perhaps the question in short is, what could be some of the gaps to really bridge both the government and its financial support with businesses and SMEs and micro SMEs?
Yes, in budget 2022, we notice that there's still assistance for recovery, and because of that, when we look into the 1.8 billion channel through the microcredit scheme with zero interest and moratorium facilities, this is very important to help these businesses, because the SMEs and micro businesses, they are really fragile. They do not have enough saving, and they took a longer time to recover when they are down. So this is something that very important, and I particularly like the zero interest and the moratorium facilities there. And also, one part of the budget also focusing on digitalization, automation, and this is something that SMEs and micro business also have to be prepared of by having a technological assistance from the government to better prepare them in trend with all this new or digital economy. We have Jendela to complete the first phase of coverage by next year. So this is something that they need to take advantage of, because something that not mentioned in budget 2022, but I think really important for the SMEs and micro businesses to prepare ahead, is that the replacement of this TPPA, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, where we have signed it, but we have yet to ratify it. But once we have ratified it, maybe next year, then it's an open market, meaning many businesses from outside can come into the business here. And there's an opportunity for the SMEs and micro businesses even to expand their businesses. But if they are not ready for this, then this is something that the government has to also think forward on how to handle this globalization and the new paradigm.
Great. That's a lot of information there that we see as an extension from what's been presented in the budget 2022. Of course, the baseline here is looking at some of the credit schemes. And aside from the budget proper, we also know that 1.8 billion ringgit will be channeled through micro credit schemes at this point through various agencies such as Tekun, Agrobank, BSN, Bank Simpanan Nasional, Bank Rakyat, and even Bank Negara Malaysia. Dr. ATK, how can some of these SMEs capitalize on these initiatives? I know I keep bringing this sort of question back to you, but with your viewpoint, perhaps experience looking at really what's happening on the ground, what would sort of your steps forward be in this aspect?
So again, really, we must take cognizance of the fact that micro businesses as such has probably taken the biggest brunt. May not be in economic impact in terms of numbers, but obviously they are the ones who have suffered the most. Simply because they're small, fragile, and like what Prof just now mentioned, their sustainability becomes questioned. And I think that we already have numbers about 30% of them permanently closing down. But for those 70% that has actually survived this pandemic process, they are now, especially in 2022, looking at a rebound, looking at growth, and certainly restocking and recapitalizing and coming back into the market. One, they must not look at access to financing alone, because it must be coupled hand-holding programs. They must look at the upgrading programs, upskilling programs, reskilling programs, and actually look at business models that are lean and a lot more agile. Because what has pandemic taught us is dependency on supply chain and single business models has actually been a failure model. So if they can pivot on to something more digital, like Prof mentioned, I think the whole digital economy story has been very well materialized in the budget, including infrastructure and also the soft skills. I think $200 million has been added on to the automation digitalization program under MDEC. And I think that MDEC program will do very, very well. And the access to financing. If you go to Tekun, you must be very, very clear who goes to Tekun. So if your requirements are first-time applicant, less than 50,000, Tekun is probably the right place to go. If you still have credit history, which is not so favorable to the banking system, then Tekun is a nice place to go. A step up would be Bank Simpanan Nasional. A step up will be the commercial banks and Bank Negara Malaysia in terms of the microfinancing. So that scaling, like I keep mentioning, must be something that the SMEs, the micro businesses themselves would probably know. And if they need help, a good place to go is to SME Corp. And I think SME Corp has got this aggregator concept, and that aggregator actually helps them channel to the specific areas of need.
I'd like to turn both your attention towards a gig economy now for a bit. There are many locals that are turning to gig economy. What are some of the factors? For what we know, it is a blooming industry of technology. We mentioned, going into, of course, having more budget into Jendela and whatnot. People are buying into, and of course, also getting onto the digital agenda. Now, the rise of those working remotely or rather co-working spaces that we see mushrooming all over. There's also lack of high-skilled workers, increasingly high cost of living. Many of these factors are now encouraging many Malaysians to go into the gig economy. So the government is saying now, hey, look, we recognize this growing trend. So they have increased the tax relief for EPF contribution by gig workers to 4,000 ringgit. About 30% of the labor force here in Malaysia, that's about 5 million people, work in the gig economy, and these numbers have been growing, especially in the past 18 months or 24 months or so. Prof, perhaps I could direct this question to you. The government now will allocate 2 billion ringgit under the Housing Credit Guarantee Scheme. This is to assist those without a steady income, such as gig economy workers, to buy homes. What are some of your thoughts around this?
Yes, this is also something new where we focusing on how these gig economy workers can also have a home to own. But we know that their income are not fixed, and sometimes they might be earning lots in a particular month, and the other month might not be anything at all. So the bank will be scratching their head to figure out how I'm going to get this regular payment, and this is where the government step in with this scheme Jaminan Kredit Perumahan. However, I also hope that we do not offer just one alternative scheme or just one scheme to home financing to these people. There are several, like a scheme like rent to own and also transit homes that can also be utilized to offer shelter or housing for them, temporary housing, not necessarily to have a 20 years, 30 years commitment for these gig workers because they value their independence, meaning in terms of working, they value their flexibility in working, but we should also give them flexibility in owning the house through the renting scheme or rent to own or other alternative to 30-year loan, 30-year bank loan.
Right, thank you very much to both of you for weighing in, Dr. A.T. Kumararajah, Secretary General of the Malaysian Associated Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, as well as Professor. Thank you so much for weighing in on some of this, initiatives that's been, of course, launched by the MOF through the budget. Associate Professor Dr. Ahmad RAZMAN, Abdul Latiff, Economist from the Putra Business School as well. We'll speak to you again in the meantime. Do stay safe and take care.
Thanks, Jessy.
We move on now to some news in brief. Let's start off with the COVID-19 vaccines. The Health Minister, Khairi Jamaluddin, has announced that booster shots will now be administered to people above 40 years old and those with comorbidities. He's also added that around 40% of booster dose recipients have, at this point, up till now, failed to turn up for appointments. So far, there will be no disciplinary action, and none has been taken as well against unvaccinated civil servants. But additionally, the Health DG, Dr. Nur Hisham, says that more than 5,000 people have been affected by long COVID as of October 2021. Let's move on to some news in tech. There have been no takers for Malaysia's 5G plan as major telcos balk over pricing and transparency. Now, on this, the Communications and Multimedia Minister says that 5G services will in fact be cost effective. In other news, Putrajaya are still not looking to ratify UN's International Convention on Civil and Political Rights just yet. And in business news, Malaysia has expanded its investments in Indonesia with the signing of MOUs and agreements worth 3.1 billion US dollars. And the finance minister says that Malaysia's economy is expected to grow at this point by 3 to 4% just this year alone. And let's move on to the Malacca elections. Police will call in candidates and supporters to assist in the probe into SOP violations on nomination day. And with the ban on political gatherings as well, candidates may be allowed to campaign on official government media pages. And in other news, Barisan Nasional makes all its Malacca candidates sign a deal against jumping parties after the polling session takes place. Although Undi 18 has not been implemented yet, we have seen many younger candidates enter the fray in this upcoming state elections. Despite the increased scrutiny, UITM has no objections against its students entering politics. And Barisan Nasional has promised to appoint 5 representatives from youth groups and NGOs if it wins the Malacca state election. And from that, I'll take you to what's been happening at the APEC summit. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said in her opening speech that the regional trade group, APEC, has taken steps to wean industries off fossil fuel subsidies. It is also taking steps to identify new environmental goals while tackling climate change and sustainability issues. APEC leaders have also rejected this protectionism amid the COVID-19 crisis. And according to China's top climate negotiator, Beijing has agreed with the United States to boost cooperation on climate action, including tackling methane emissions. He added that China would strengthen its targets for cutting emissions and will develop a national plan. The US and China, the world's 2 largest emitters of greenhouse gases, have reached an agreement on a joint declaration which will be released very soon. And of course, on the global conference, COP26 is ongoing. Its climate summit will turn its focus now to climate change and action in cities today. According to the UN, more than 55% of the global population lives in urban areas, and it is expected to go up to 68% by the year 2050. Most of its growth is forecast to happen in Africa and in Asia. Now, as average global temperatures increase, it will further put strain on water and power resources. It will also increase the risk of wildfires and storm surges. And the British Prime Minister has urged world leaders to go further with their climate change pledges, adding that the goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius remains within reach. Now, the COP26 summit hopes to put into action the Paris 2015 landmark when countries settled on this 1.5 degrees Celsius target. And let me take you through what's happening on Twitter right now. Football fans are talking about yet another managerial change as Aston Villa is in final talks with former Liverpool star Steven Gerrard before confirming him as their new manager. And a look at the property world. Tweets regarding China's Evergrande Group announcing their default are making the rounds on Twitter as well. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been this edition of The Brief. I'm Jessy Chahal. Keep it locked on to Bernama TV for more updates coming your way. Remember, we're on Twitter too, so you can share any of your thoughts, views, or opinions, and we'll hope to bring that to light on the program as well. Till then, stay safe and take care. Bye-bye.